got a lot of people. Tell us about that part. I think that's an important piece.
Yeah, what you're talking about is the Non-GMO Project, and on many of the products you see in the stores today, you see the little butterfly logo, which signifies that the products have been verified to the Non-GMO Project standards. And it's the only non-GMO claim that involves testing. And what I saw years ago happening that really concerned me was, the organic standard does not allow genetic contamination, but we were actually witnessing in some of the major commodity crops like corn, soybeans, canola, we were seeing the contamination happen, and to no fault of the farmer. Obviously, some of it was pollination, some of it was seed, and we needed to make sure that didn't wake up one day and see organic corn contaminated with GMOs all over the New York Times, and so we needed a standard where there was testing. We needed to improve the supply chain, and at first a lot of people resisted. There was a lot of people that did not want to do this. It cost money. And a lot of the manufacturers felt like, hey, we're already organic. We're spending the money to do that. We don't need to spend money doing anything else. But what people realized is when they went through the process, they got verified, they put it on their product. I remember the guy that owns Garden of Eden chips said, once I put that on the label, my sales went up 40%. So after that, it was much easier to get people to say, we got to do this too. And today, the organic corn crop, the organic soybeans, there is a much smaller amount of contamination today than there was 10, 15 years ago, and it's directly attributable to the efforts of the Non-GMO Project.
Thank the co-op for sponsoring this, and Kitchell for doing this impossible work of piecing together all these us old people, recalling what we were doing 40 years ago. And I think you did a great job of the narrative of individuals just trying. And what I think was so striking about that time, and that's similar to the work I'm doing now, is at the time when we were holding these meetings in the 1980s, there was a lot of different sorts of people at the meetings. There was farmers that had dirt all over themselves. There was university researchers. There was restaurateurs. I mean, as Warren Weber describing, hoping his neighbors wouldn't see him, harvesting tiny lettuce, because that's what the restaurant people wanted. It was this very diverse set of people that were all focused together on different pieces of the problem. Not everybody saw the same problem. They saw their own problem. Some of the stuff that Michael was famous for at that time, of really figuring out how to be a businessman that could market the material and get the produce to market without having it been destroyed by heat. That really took a different skill than the farmer was thinking about, or than what the university researcher was thinking about. That same idea we've brought forward here with the work I do with the Sierra Fund, where we're trying to take that same concept and transform mining. You might have seen that bumper sticker years ago that said, if you can't grow it, you gotta mine it. And they're right. That's true. That's where we get things from. We either mine them or we grow them. So up here in Nevada County, where we have a lot of old historic farms, we have a lot of historic ranches, but we also have forests and we have mines, and all of these things together comprise our landscape. So the Sierra Fund's been trying to figure out how to restore this place, and trying to work not just with conservationists like ourselves, but with folks like the mining industry that understand what happened here and therefore have a much better understanding of how to fix it than we do, but also working with fish biologists who understand very clearly the threat posed by the mining that happened. So taking what we learned back then of trying not to vilify anybody, but to try to find economically viable, environmentally sound, and socially just solutions to the problems of feeding ourselves, clothing ourselves, and living on this planet. It's the exact same fight. It's the exact same fight. I just think that we're actually further behind on mining. I've just traveled the world for the last 3 months, lucky me. And everywhere I went, England, Cornwall, in Geneva, you can sit in Geneva and see the abandoned sand mine on the other side of Lake Lucerne. Putting contaminated sediment right into the water over there. So everywhere in the world we farm, everywhere in the world we mine, and what we've learned as you saw in that film, and as we know here, because we're from Nevada County, is if we apply ourselves to a problem, we can solve it, but not if we only look at one little tiny piece of it, and not if we don't listen to what the other people around us are saying about their experiences. So that was really fun to watch that, although it's extremely horrifying to see yourself 35 years ago, right next to yourself 35 years later.
Respect and rely on.
Okay, well, I would answer that by saying that organic is a very large industry these days. There's lots of people participating, and therefore there are some examples of bad actors, and it happens. I think this past year there's been like a number of organic certificates revoked from some of the imported organic that's coming in from Turkey or from China. So it does go on. There's a financial incentive for people to cheat the system, and whenever you have that, you're gonna have some fraud. I think under Obama, the USDA was stocked with organic advocates, people that really cared about the system, and I think they really worked hard to clean up any of the problems with the program. As we know, that isn't necessarily going on as much today with the new administration. Might be some cause for some concern. But I think by and large, what we've seen from the decades of the industry, the real fraud was in the 70s. We had everybody and their brother was saying they were organic, and very few of them were in the beginning. And over time, they got weeded out, they got cleaned up. And today there is a law. You can sue somebody. People can be fined, and it's a real crime to have a fraudulent label and that type of thing. So I think it happens very sparingly. Some of the issues you're talking about with chickens out to pasture or cattle, the animal welfare laws around organic livestock sometimes are very complex, and they can be, people can not necessarily cheat, but they can toe a thin line, whether animal has access to pasture or not. Does that mean the door is open? And but if you're in New Hampshire and it's 20 below, maybe the animal doesn't want to go out, right? So there's some real complex issues around some of that. But to me, I think they've done a great job over the years of keeping the integrity and the standards, and by and large, most of the players, I think, have an incentive not to cheat, because if they do, they're going to be out of business. So Izzy, you might have another thought there, I don't know.
No, I think that's exactly right. In fact, I remember a very vigorous conversation about this in the 1980s, when some folks were saying, let's not put the government in charge of enforcement, because once they're in charge of enforcement, it's now a political process to get them to enforce. Some folks argued pretty vigorously that they wanted it just to be a standard and that consumers would sue and not expect the government to do something. And so that fight was kind of lost in some ways, but you can still bring suits against it. It's one reason why it's so handy where we have like a group like Sierra Harvest here locally, where it's organic and it's local, so you know. A farmer knows when they walk onto an operation. I mean, I was a farmer for 20 years, my first husband, Mike, right there. Still a farmer, we know when you're using chemicals, so it's real hard to pull it off for any length of time in this country and in this environment. But I would just say that this is a lesson I think we have to learn as environmentalists. Passing a law doesn't necessarily change anything. Mm-hmm. And so it really takes beyond just, we fixed that because we passed a law. It does take a vigilance. It does take complaining to your produce manager. It does really, somebody like Michael has certainly seen people try to do fraudulent practices like this and can bring a great deal of pressure to bear, but they have to know about it first.
Hey, I just want to say too, one of the things that most concerned me about the local food movement is great, reducing miles to the shelf and all that, but if it's not local organic, I don't want it. I don't want pesticides grown in my backyard. So it's like I know small farmers selling the farmers market and different that, you know, there's certification programs for small farmers now that are very inexpensive. I don't know if you are looking into that, but you know, it's not an excuse to me just to say we're local, so it must be okay. I mean, we have to force all of our local growers to be on an organic program and to, you know, work hard at getting some kind of certification or verification.
Warren Weber.
I have to say I was way more intimidated by it than it was actually difficult. Once you kind of dive into it, and I work with CCOF, Certified Organic Farmers, and once I kind of dove into it, and I was a little bit anticipating, you know, like somebody's gonna come out and try and catch me doing something that I shouldn't be doing, and I don't know what I shouldn't be doing, and that's kind of how I went into it. But once I started the process, it's at least my certifier is there to help you do it right, and help you meet all the goals that you need to be meeting. So I just found, I mean, it takes time. I'm not gonna lie. You know, filling out all the paperwork and making sure you've got all your records in order. It certainly takes time, but it was not the experience I was expecting, and it was much less challenging and much less expensive once I started doing it. I don't know how the other certifiers are, but working with my certifier has been really nice and really easy. So, I mean, just taking the time to dedicate to it, it's not that much, but I don't know. I haven't found it to be that challenging or that expensive or really that big of a deal at all, other than just taking the time to do it.
Well, you know, as an old lefty, Kalita, that we always have a distrust of anything big, you know. I watched as I grew my company how it changed people's perception, even though we were the same people. Somehow, just because we got bigger, so that, you know, there's this feeling like, well, you can't be doing things right. And I think we have to really look at, it isn't the size of the company, it's their ethics. There's a lot of big companies that have really good ethics. The companies that I've watched over the years acquire companies, I can remember when General Mills bought Cascadian, and I was really close to Gene Kahn, the founder of Cascadian. He was promoted to a vice president role at General Mills, and he got to attend the board meetings. And I asked him what that was like, and he said, you know, I said, are they trying to cut costs? Are they trying to see if they can, you know, lower a standard or something? He goes, hell no. He goes, they just paid a bunch of money for a company that's growing 10 times as fast as their stuff. They don't want to mess with that at all. What they're asking me at the board meetings is, how can we get some of this other stuff in the rest of our products? You know, and I think that the organic companies have influenced. If you go walk down, you know, go to SPD today versus 10 years ago, versus 20 years ago. I mean, 50% of it is pretty good quality food, right? And I mean, that's why we can look back and say, wow, we really did influence these big, you know, food processors. Not that they're all doing great stuff, but I just think it's overblown to worry if somebody that works at Kellogg's is on the National Organic Standards Boards, because I do think most companies have the same goal, which is to stay economically viable, which is to make money, and they're making money selling organic food right now. And I don't think they have any incentive to lower a standard. So that's my personal opinion. One other comment that you made about the future that I'd like to say is, you know, we're worried about pesticides and you know, herbicides in our land, our soil, our water, and our, you know, how they affect our health. But you know, it's still, to me, the future is we got to look at everything. You know, I mean, you know, you get the BPA from the can, from the receipt at the cash register. You know, you get fumes off a new car. You know, all of these carcinogens are everywhere, and we can't just think, oh, because we got the food thing covered, that, you know, that's just, we're just scratching, you know, the surface. So as far as raising the bar, we got to look at, you know, everything. And some of it was touched in the movie, the clothing and, you know, things like that. But there's so much more to do to remove chemicals from our environment. That's to me what these younger guys they gotta pick it up, and we solve food a little bit, but you guys gotta cover the rest of it.
And I would just comment that this sort of mixing between a political movement. So some of what you're talking about is whether people have access to high quality food. And we were talking about this tonight. Kalita came to my house. We had delicious grilled eggplant and peppers with onions and a delicious, very expensive piece of salmon from the BriarPatch Co-op, but it was wild caught, delicious. And as we were eating it, I was talking about friends of mine who really truly didn't know that a hamburger is not good for them. In the 1970s, there was a slideshow put together by this group that was out of Stockton working with people with hunger. It was called Hamburger USA, and it was about all the different things in a hamburger and where it all came from. And they included something about the tomato, the hard tomato that I talked about in the film. And at that time, it was, shocking news that we shouldn't be eating diet soda and, fat, dipped in fat and then boiled in fat with pesticides all over it. Most people still don't really know how to eat properly. They don't know how to cook. In fact, I think fewer people know how to cook today than did 20 or 30 years ago. Yeah. They don't know what to do with all that produce at the store. They have no idea how to cook it. They're reaching for frozen boxes and for cans and for stuff in jars. So you have to separate the issues we're talking about here, the growing of an industry versus sort of the political question of access to safe food, who controls the land and the water. That's what I've always been really interested in this question of something we used to say in the 70s, the people that work the land should own the land. I actually still think that's really important. Because I think that people that own the land and have a different stewardship relationship to that land than people that just come through for 6 weeks a year and then leave to go harvest someplace else. That's my political ideology. It's not what we're going to have tomorrow. So we have to separate out sort of political goals, policy goals, and then just helping more farmers. It's a little bit of a crisis. Some of the, let's say, old people I know that own a farm that are maybe, let's say they're in their late 60s, for example, and their children don't, let's say, want to farm, and they're still out there every day trying to farm. What's the next step? Yes, I am. I'm teasing my first husband, but not really teasing. It's a big question. Who are going to be the farmers of the future if you can't make a decent living, and you can't get health insurance, and you can't pay for your kid to go to college? One of the driving factors that drove some of the people I know into organic agriculture, I remember particularly a man named Glenn Anderson down in the valley. Him and his brother were growing almonds, and the two of them inherited their father's almond orchard. And one of them, Glenn, said, "I am not spraying it at all." He'd come back from Vietnam, didn't want to spray, took his farm through an organic program, and eventually they became the subject of research by the University of California, who looked at these two crops planted at the same time, same variety, managed by two different techniques. Glenn, my friend, became organic farmer. He started to make a really good living. The organic almond market was really hot in the 90s. And their little co-op were they'd take it turns. Who's going to go to represent us to France this year to go sell our crops, or to Japan? Their kids were going to Harvard. They were buying new tractors. The conventional almond growers were taking part-time other jobs and driving crud, and their kids were not able to go to college. So it was striking how much more money the organic farmers were making in almonds. It was mind-blowing how much more money they were making. And that really was important. So even though some of us might, we all need to make a living. You have to be able to make a living and be a farmer. And the problem we have is if we're up against, as a farmer, if you're the farmer out in the field hoeing, and I used to say this and my urban friends would laugh, if I'm out hoeing in the field, I'm competing against all the other people that are hoeing in the field. Ha 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 ha. Truly, if we're out there trying to harvest garlic, we're competing against farm labor in India, who are getting paid 5 cents a day. It just doesn't work. So internationally, that's why these international issues, we have to keep them in mind. We have to think globally and act locally, and work with companies that have ethics, like United Natural Foods, or the kinds of things that Michael's talking about, where you actually have to believe in some of these institutions, our governmental institutions, and work to make them more active, more responsive to our needs. 10:02.
Anybody else?
There is an organization called FarmLink, which is trying to link up older farmers with younger farmers. And they're creating a database and trying to hook people up together. And they've been very, very successful in making long-term relationships with new younger farmers coming on and beginning to pay a cost forward. But I'm not familiar with anybody that's putting together money just to help new.
Scary.
So on that,
I wouldn't end on that note.
no, here I'm gonna end on a good one.
Let's end on education.
Education.
Let me say one thing to this, okay? I know how you can develop those those thoughts. But I'll just say one thing. In my GMO career with the project and everything, it was really interesting because Monsanto was always the evil empire. Everybody hates Monsanto, right? You look at their history and everything. But every public company, every company, their goal is to make money and please their shareholders. Monsanto stock's been way down. They recently, they sold their RBGH, company years ago, right? When nobody wanted to buy that milk anymore. They just acquired a company in Europe really quietly that sells non-GMO seeds. They're seeing the writing on the wall that plan that you're talking about, it didn't work. Nobody really wants, genetically engineered foods. They're going to keep trying for years and years, but the consumers control what these companies do. Just like Alan Garcia said in the movie, we got the ballot box with our dollars. If we decide we don't want that stuff, they're going to find some stuff we do want, because their role is to make money and please their shareholders. And if they can't do it with GMOs, they're going to do it with something else. And like I said, they just acquired a company in Europe that sells non-GMO seeds.
And I would just like to say, I know lots of people that are young, that are extremely ideologically motivated towards a better world. I think it's very common. For thousands of years now, we've all thought, that next generation. And I think that we've also thought, this is the worst time ever. But I'd like to remind people that 150 years ago, this country was at war. This is the worst it's ever been in the United States. Oh, really? Remember the war over slavery that we had not so long ago, where we were killing each other? It's better now. 2,000 years ago, as you walked into Jerusalem, no matter however you walked into there, you passed people who were hanging on crosses. Not one, hundreds. That was the normal course of business. People were just being tortured to death in public. That was the way things were. It's not like that anymore, folks. I really think it's very, very common for people to think it's worse now. And certainly we have our own crisis. We always do, but that's how it's always been as humans. So I think it's very important to look out and see what the youth have done. The thing that's happening with gender is mind-blowing. In just one generation, it's gone from being nobody's gay to nobody cares if you're gay or not gay, or what your gender is, or what your genitalia look like. In another generation, that probably won't even be a thing on the list anymore that you check when you're writing down your name. And the same thing that what Michael is saying here, it doesn't work. Once refrigerators were invented, the ice cube salespeople just couldn't keep selling ice cubes. We didn't want them anymore. Once cars were invented, we didn't want buggy whips anymore. They just couldn't sell them to us no matter what they did. So I think that's what we have to keep in mind, is that there are ways to protest, that things are really important. We have to keep the pressure on, but we have to do it knowing that there's at least, it's better to be glass half full than half empty in this world, I believe.
All right. That's about it. And thanks, Mark, for having it here.